If all you knew about crime came from TV, you'd probably think the world is just crawling with these brilliant, super wealthy, middle-aged masterminds. And of course, they're almost always caught by some impossibly glamorous forensic scientist. But the reality of crime, well, it's something else entirely. So let's dive in and really separate the facts from the fiction.
So, how real is your favorite crime show? It seems like a pretty simple question, right? But the answer? Well, it opens up this massive, massive gap between the stories we love to watch and what's actually happening in our justice system. Today, we're going to get into that gap and figure out why it matters so much.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by pulling back the curtain on the crime show illusion itself. Then, we'll put it side by side with the hard facts. From there, we'll explore the psychology of it all, what all this fake crime does to us, and see how the media decides who looks like a criminal. Then, we'll connect all those dots to the real-world consequences and wrap up with how you can become a much smarter, more critical viewer.
All right, first things first, let's unmask this narrative that's been so carefully built for our entertainment. Okay, the difference between TV crime and real crime is just staggering. On TV, you've got these older, wealthy criminal masterminds with these complex, thought-out plans. But in the real world, it's a totally different story. Most crime is actually committed by young men, often from tough, low-income backgrounds, and the reasons are usually spontaneous and, honestly, tragically trivial. And get this, while TV detectives solve basically every single case with some big dramatic reveal, real-life clearance rates, even for something as serious as homicide, are nowhere near that perfect 100% we see on screen.
So let's put some hard numbers to this whole distortion. This is where the story gets really, really wild. Okay, get this. If the little town of Cabot Cove from Murder, She Wrote were a real place in the US, its homicide rate would literally make it the murder capital of the world. And if you scale that up, the number of murders we see across all of American media is the equivalent of more than 500,000 every single year.
Now, let's compare that to the real number. In the entire United States, there are roughly 16,000 homicides a year. That difference is it's astronomical. The media isn't just exaggerating crime, it's creating a completely different universe of violence.
And all of this leads to one of the biggest side effects, something called the CSI Effect. Shows like CSI have created what researchers call an epistemological distortion, which is just a fancy way of saying it completely warps our understanding of how evidence and justice actually work. We see these slick labs and these amazing gadgets solving every single case, and we start expecting that in the real world. It creates an impossible standard for the messy, often underfunded reality of police work.
So we know the portrayal is false. But what does watching all of this fake crime actually do to our brains? How does it build this world of fear inside our heads? Well, this brings us to a really important idea called the cultivation hypothesis. The basic theory is that the more TV we consume, the more our own perception of the real world starts to look like the world on TV. This can lead to what's known as a mean world belief, where we start to feel like violence and danger are lurking around every single corner, even when the actual data shows that crime rates might be at historic lows.
But here's the thing. Media's influence isn't some kind of absolute mind control. It's really important to get the difference between two kinds of learning. See, media is great at teaching us supposed facts, like that bleach destroys DNA. That's just passive, informational learning. But it's actually really weak when it comes to changing our core behaviors or deep-seated motivations. It doesn't just create violent people out of thin air.
And this is a vital distinction. Our brains are actually pretty smart. We're good at recognizing that a show like Law & Order is entertainment. So the cultivation effect from fictional shows is pretty weak. You know what the real heavyweight champion of cultivating fear is? The news. Because we see the news as reality. Its portrayal of crime has a much, much stronger and more direct impact on those mean world beliefs.
Now, this whole distortion isn't just about the numbers, it's about people. There's a really clear and frankly troubling pattern in who gets cast as the hero and who gets cast as the villain. And that has some pretty profound social implications.
For example, Latinos make up a really significant part of the U.S. population, but on television, they only account for about 6.5% of characters. That's roughly half of their actual number. And when they are shown, they are disproportionately cast in criminal roles.
The bias can be incredibly subtle, almost subconscious. Studies that looked at shows like Law & Order found that black offenders were shown in handcuffs way more often than white offenders,
Without a single word being spoken, this creates this powerful visual link in our minds between race and criminality, reinforcing old stereotypes.
And this bias extends to age, too, especially with something that experts call juvenoia, this exaggerated, almost paranoid fear of young people. Media tends to stuff them into four main boxes, from the innocent Disney kid all the way to the one that causes the most fear, the teen psychopath. This teen psychopath narrative fuels these huge moral panics about violent youth. But the reality, the actual facts, people under 18 commit only 8% of homicides. The media's obsession with violent kids is completely out of step with what's really happening.
So why does any of this matter? I mean, it's just TV, right? Well, not exactly. Because this cultivated fear, this bias, it doesn't just stay on the screen. It spills out into the real world, and it ends up shaping our laws and our whole society.
The biggest danger of all this media-driven fear is, as one researcher put it so perfectly, the misallocation of our social resources. We end up spending our energy, our money, and our attention on all the wrong problems.
These media-fueled moral panics, as they're called, can lead to real-life policies that actually damage fundamental rights like due process. We get so wrapped up in these sensationalized threats that we pour billions into reactive measures while totally ignoring the actual systemic root causes of crime, things like poverty and a lack of opportunity.
So, what can we do? The answer really lies in developing a skill that's become absolutely essential for surviving in the modern world, and that's media literacy.
So, let's boil this all down. Here are the 3 crucial things to take away from all this. First, trust your brain. It's actually pretty good at telling entertainment apart from reality. Second, remember that your personal fear of crime is much more likely to be shaped by your actual environment and, most importantly, by the news you consume, not by TV dramas. And finally, always keep in mind that crime on TV is a product. It is selectively packaged to appeal to a majority audience, not to reflect reality.
Look, understanding the architecture of this distorted reality is an incredibly powerful tool. It lets us enjoy the drama without letting the fiction dictate our fears, or worse, our politics. So the next time you turn on a crime show, I want you to ask yourself, what will you see differently? What choices, what biases, what little distortions will you notice now?